If I had to start over and learn Spanish from scratch today, this is what I'd do. Today, I'm going to walk you through what actually worked to help me become fluent, what I would do differently if I was starting today with all the new tools available, and the 3-step system that I now teach to true beginners, which you may be if you're watching this video, so that you can start speaking Spanish in the shortest time possible and in the most enjoyable way. And even if you have no language background, I'll show you how it's absolutely possible to go from self-doubt to confidence, just like our student Elizabeth did. Elizabeth joined my Spanish starter course 12 weeks ago. She told us, I had absolutely no language background when I began, a true beginner. At times I thought, I don't belong here. It's too late to be learning a new language. I stumbled, mispronounced words, and read at an incredibly slow speed. But she kept showing up. And now, 12 weeks later, this is what she says. I understand a lot more. I can better pronounce words, and I've increased my speaking pace. I'm building more confidence with each passing week. Gracias to all on Erica's team and the wonderful classmates I've met. In fact, if you're just getting started like Elizabeth was, I've created something totally free for you. It's called the Spanish Intro Pack, a free interactive mini course where I'll guide you toward your first Spanish presentation, your self-introduction. You'll work on pronunciation, letters, and introducing yourself, all with video, audio, examples, and practice activities. It's actually week 1 of the self-study portion of my full 12-week course for beginners called Spanish Starter. So you can grab that free intro week at the link that I'll leave in the description below. And in fact, enrollment into my full course, into the Spanish Starter course, is now open, but only for a few more days. We close enrollment on Monday, June 30th, which is when we kick off the live classes that accompany each week of self-study material. I'd love for you to join us. I will also leave that information in the description. So let's talk a little bit about mi historia, mi experiencia aprendiendo español. I've talked about this more in depth in other videos in the past, but in a nutshell, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I have no native Spanish-speaking family members, and I never took traditional Spanish classes. When I started learning, I didn't start with textbooks, grammar books, or memorizing vocabulary lists. Instead, I listened to Spanish music. I learned how to properly pronounce Spanish sounds and then learned how to read out loud. I started with a children's book of stories, so I find it so key that listening and learning how to pronounce Spanish be your first priority. And so that is what I walk you through in the free interactive mini course that I mentioned, the Spanish Intro Pack. So don't forget to take advantage of that resource while I have it available. I also watch shows like Destinos, an introduction to Spanish, which immersed me in the language. So I got comfortable with being uncomfortable, not understanding everything, which is such an important skill to develop. I also did several of the lessons in the Destinos workbook that did help me to get a basic understanding of how the language worked. I don't think I finished the book, but the work that I did there did give me some of those basic grammar foundations that I would pick up on and help me notice those things as I was listening to the videos. I also did a lot of mimicking. I repeated what I was hearing over and over again, even when I didn't understand everything that I was saying. The same applies to the reading out loud that I mentioned earlier. I would read things without understanding what it meant, but knowing the sounds, I was able to read. So my foundation consisted of a lot of comprehensible input that helped me build my vocabulary and start to notice grammar. I noticed a lot more grammar than what was explicitly taught to me. I did output at first in the way of mimicking and reading out loud. So I was just imitating what I was hearing. That helped me build strong pronunciation skills. And I got some knowledge of the basics of Spanish grammar, how to put sentences together through that book. And then I took it to real life when my family and I became involved in a voluntary education work, community work with Spanish-speaking individuals. Prior to this, I didn't know how to speak in conversation. I'd never had a conversation in Spanish. I was very nervous to do so. I was a shy person anyway, so this part took a while to adjust to. Also, when I would listen to native speakers at natural speed, I could not understand hardly anything. I would pick up words here and there from what I had learned up to that point, but when I would open my mouth to say something, shockingly to those who didn't know me yet, I was almost always mistaken for a native speaker, and that had to do purely with the work that I had done with pronunciation. In order to have my first conversations, I realized that it was much easier if I would prepare for them in a similar way as I would prepare for presentations because I didn't have enough vocabulary for spontaneity. So I used what I now call prepare, practice, present. If you've been following me for any length of time, you've surely heard me say those words already. It's a method that I very frequently share with you guys and that I teach my students. Obviously, I didn't have a name for it back then. I was just winging it and experimenting and seeing what worked and what didn't. I was able to give presentations in Spanish, have basic conversations. My skills increased over time, as skills tend to do when you're consistent. And about 4 years later, an opportunity opened up for me to become a Spanish medical interpreter. And I worked in that field for 6 years. All of that was long before meeting my husband, who is from Mexico, and certainly before moving here to Mexico, where I live now. So I mention that because you do not need to be in a relationship with a Spanish speaker, and you do not need to move abroad to become a fluent Spanish speaker. I'm proof of that. And I continue to learn more and more up to this day. So that's my story in a nutshell. And it worked. It worked really well. And I am so grateful that I started learning Spanish completely ignorant of the way that most people were going about trying to learn a language. Back then, the traditional way was school, especially in high school and college, lots of grammar-heavy assignments. I saw what a lot of my friends were studying. But this resulted in students who could simply not speak the language. So I, having not studied Spanish formally, would help my university graduated friends who had studied Spanish with tips to get them actually speaking confidently and teach them how we actually speak. And another thing that I'm grateful for is that we didn't have so many distractions back then. So many courses and apps and robots. I was never in analysis paralysis. What do I use? There are so many options. I used what I had at my disposal and just focused on the fundamentals. I didn't know what else to focus on. I just used common sense and logic. I need to be able to say this. This is coming up. Let me prepare for that. What words am I going to need? Who can I get to help me prepare for this? How can I try to put something together myself with dictionaries? And nowadays we have so many resources, and you would think that the world would be full of amazingly fluent Spanish speakers, having learned Spanish easily as a second language. But this is just not the case. Learners nowadays are so confused and are spending years as beginners. They can't move past it. They're spending more time trying to find the perfect method than just getting their hands dirty and doing the thing. And I find that rather sad. And this is one of the reasons why I have always considered myself more of a coach than a teacher. Even before I became a certified language coach, that was the role that people needed me to take on. It's actually the one that I enjoy the most. I'm tempted to say that if I could go back to that time, I wouldn't change anything about the way that I learned, mistakes and all. I needed to go through that trial and error process. It helped me figure out what worked and helps me help my students cut through the noise nowadays. But that's not the question here. The question is, if I were starting today, would I do anything differently with the new tools that we have available? Yes, there are certainly things that I would use. I would do a few things differently. First, I would take advantage of the opportunities for more targeted input and more variety of input. When I say input, I'm referring to listening and reading, but especially right now, I'm referring to the listening. When I wanted to listen to Spanish, my options were kind of limited. It was hard for me to find material that was exactly what I needed, not too easy, not too hard. And I also couldn't just go to YouTube and look up a video in Spanish about something that I was interested in. That didn't exist. That would have been amazing. But the fact that we can now find materials that interest us to consume in Spanish, we can even be picky about what accent we want to listen to. That's incredible. We have so many more opportunities for input. Learning through your interest is one of the most powerful ways to learn. And we have so many more opportunities now to do that. So I definitely would have taken advantage of that. Second, I would start speaking a bit earlier and more frequently because I would do a lot of that online. I am not a person who is naturally inclined to go out and seek out opportunities to do things in person that make me nervous. I had this in-person Spanish-speaking opportunity, community work, come to me, and I am forever grateful because I probably wouldn't have sought that out on my own initiative. I've always been introverted. I have tons of fun with people, but they drain me. And not only that, even as a teen, I just liked doing things efficiently. I actually started homeschooling at some point in middle school, and I was like, finally, I can just sit down and learn, which I've always liked doing, without literally half the hours of the school day being spent with, Johnny, sit down, you're gonna get written up. Waiting the 10 minutes that it took for the papers to be passed out to all the students, and the time that it took for try not to use real names here, for Mrs. Jones to come in and flirt with Mr. Smith before we could actually start the class. I was just so over all of that. I would just always be thinking, man, there are other things that I would like to do with this time. So I really enjoyed learning independently, all subjects. But the downside of learning language independently is that you don't have people to talk to or practice with. When I got my in-person opportunities later to practice with people, that's when my speaking took off. Plus, I was way more motivated to learn. I had a true reason. But those opportunities were only at certain times. So if I could have turned on my computer and gotten extra speaking practice in whenever I wanted, that would have been game-changing. I believe that my speaking confidence would have increased even faster. And also my speaking accuracy, because I didn't have people to correct me. You know how your friends, if they understood you, they might not correct you unless you said something terribly wrong. So there were mistakes that I would make continuously and wouldn't realize until I was able to self-correct. And learning how to self-correct, which you can do if you are consuming enough input, is so important and such a wonderful skill to develop. But there's nothing like having someone who is there to help you and has the ability to do so, give you corrections in the moment. Because I have found that those stick better than when I go off to look something up later. So basically, I waited to speak with others until I had to, but that also means that I forgot a lot of what I had learned earlier on because I didn't use it right away. It also means that my speaking opportunities were limited to the times that I did have to spend in person with Spanish speakers. Fortunately, it was quite a bit, but it could have been even more if I had had online opportunities to complement that. The third thing that I would do differently if I were learning Spanish from scratch nowadays, I would definitely use AI to look up words, definitions, and explanations because it's a lot faster than Google or other online dictionaries, which is what I would use. And while I was following the prepare, practice, present method, I would have used some AI tools, especially during the prepare and practice parts, for additional speaking practice and to help me prepare scripts of things that I wanted to say. I hope that if I were starting over nowadays, I would still put in the work to try myself first and then have those tools give me the corrections rather than just having it write something out for me, because doing it yourself first is so much more effective for retention. So in a nutshell, I would use the tools that are currently available not to change the fundamentals of what I did, but to enhance them, more targeted input. I'd use them to make my research during independent study more efficient and blend my independent study with real human connection faster and more frequently, taking advantage of the easier ways that we now have to connect with people. Honestly, I think that's the most exciting thing. That's why I created my Spanish starter course for absolute beginners the way that I did, to give you the structure, the input, and the strong foundation that you need, but paired with speaking practice and conversation practice right from the start, even if it's the most basic conversation, so that you don't lose what you learn. And I have been delighted to see how well it works for my students. Lorraine, who also just recently graduated from Spanish Starter, was what I call a false beginner. She had tried before, but was still at the beginning stages. She says, I have dabbled with Spanish for a number of years off and on, and I have never been able to string together a sentence until now. I may not know all the tenses and all the rules, but I can make myself understood. Thank you, Erica, and all the CCC team members for your commitment and patience. So sweet. She's now ready to move on to the next level of our program. So, what is the 3-step method that I recommend for beginners now? Step 1, focus on listening and pronunciation. This is a fundamental element that will never change. Get your ears and your tongue used to the sounds and the rhythm of Spanish. Listen to music, short dialogues, read, mimic. This is the best time to develop good pronunciation habits and the foundation of your listening skills that will serve you forever. This is exactly what I did. Number 2, start building sentences early. Don't just memorize vocabulary. use it. Translate your own thoughts into Spanish with guidance. Learn to express simple things you'd actually say. This makes everything more memorable. Number 3, speak with real people. The sooner you start speaking, even if it's very basic, the more natural it becomes. Yes, you'll make mistakes, that's the point, but it will feel normal. Speaking will feel normal, like part of what you're doing to learn Spanish, not a reward that you get once you've gotten to some arbitrary level. And that's how you'll be able to move forward with confidence. That's what happened with Elizabeth, who I mentioned in the beginning. She says, everyone was patient, encouraging, and kept cheering me on. This support, combined with the class practices being fun and engaging, how could I not show up? Of course, my husband is taking the classes too, which was another motivator. So she showed up again and again, and now she's not just learning Spanish, she's using it. And she's enjoying the process. These are just a couple of examples. We are so proud of all of our students. This is what happens inside a Spanish starter. You don't just study, you speak. You practice, you build confidence. You become the kind of person who can say, yes, I speak Spanish and I'm getting better every day. When you enroll, you get access to the 12-week course and you can begin preparing before classes begin. The link is in the description below. Don't miss it. We kick off Monday, June 30th. So if you're wondering, can I really learn Spanish? I'm starting from scratch and I have no language background, or what I'm doing has not taken me beyond beginner. Let me say this. Yes, you can. Yes, it's worth it. And now is the time to start. Enrollment to Spanish Starter closes Monday, June 30th. So this is your moment. Click the link below to join Spanish Starter, and I hope to see you in class.